Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now, if you've ever picked up the Band of Brothers box set to start with bolt action, or pretty much any war game that's set in the World War II period, you are likely going to have come across some US paratroopers. These guys were touted as the best of the best, and they held the line in some of the toughest fighting anywhere along the European theatre of operations. They're a pretty cool bunch of miniatures to chuck into your army too. So I figured what would be cool would be to do something about getting them on the table pretty easily. Now, I've deliberately kept to a fairly limited number of paints. I think I'm up to 10 or 11, and that's including a couple of notes on different webbing colours that you can use. We'll get into some of the historical stuff in this video a little bit later. So, anything you want to know, feel free, of course, you can ask, and let's get started. I'll link all of these in the description below, and you can see what we're going to use. So, grab your brushes, let's go. Now to prime this fella, I've hit him with a spray of Citadel's Zandri Dust. You can use any sort of beige colour, or you could even go for a mid-tone grey. I've used beige because anywhere that I might miss, it's not going to matter too much. We're going to have kind of an army man brown in that recess and it'll do the job. In particular, for some of the webbing colours, and we'll get to that later, that will work much better. Now, to start off with, to do his uniform, I'm going to start with, ironically enough, Russian uniform. Oops, and I'm going to throw the miniature violently across the room. I like not editing those bits. Anyway, here we go. So we've got one of the Citadel base brushes. This is the large base brush. And I quite like these for the little wedge tip they've got. It's actually really handy for getting in and doing these things really quickly. Now you will probably find in some areas you want to come back and do a second coat later. Don't worry too much if you get anywhere on hands and what have you, helmet particularly, but try at the moment and avoid doing his pack. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes. Now while he's off to the side drying, we're going to do a very quick history lesson on US webbing colours, because oh boy, who doesn't need that? Now, generally speaking, the later into the war you go, the greener things got. Now, there are three colours which are kind of most common for US webbing, and they are in order of when they were introduced. Get this. OD9, olive drab 9, commonly referred to as khaki. OD3, 9 then 3, don't ask me, and OD7. Now, I've got these three colours here, Iraqi sand, pastel green, and green grey, which I think are the best ones to represent those three colours. OD3 in particular was quite pale. It was a very nearly kind of raw khaki colour. Because we're going to shade over this pastel green, it doesn't dry as green as it looks in the pot for a start, and with a shade it's going to look much more natural. If you wanted to use something that is a bit more sort of neutral khaki, then something like stone grey will do the job very well in that respect, but you would probably want to highlight that with something when you're finished with it. Now, generally speaking, like I said, the later we go, the more green things got. OD9, khaki, was being produced right up until 1943, but because of the massive stocks being made, goodness me, it took forever for these to sort of filter through to the front. So you could have guys who were being issued with original kit all the way through to near the end of the war. Likewise, somebody being a replacement, a newcomer deployed for the first time in 1945, you might assume they would have the dark green kit. They might be a veteran who's just having their kit replaced through wear and tear. So it's a minefield, let's put it that way. I would look at the paratroopers as having some of the latest equipment. And certainly in the case of Operation Market Garden, I would guess that they were mostly equipped with brand new kit. This was introduced in 1943, so I'm actually going to go with pastel green. Two reasons. First of all, it's a little bit more interesting on the tabletop. This will be much brighter. It will be easier to see. And because we're going for visual interest, this is still thematically and historically appropriate, but I think it's going to look better. And second, green-grey is going to look very close to Russian uniform when we've shaded it, so they will almost blend together. So, for that reason, here comes our pastel green. And it looks atrocious going on. Don't get me wrong. Like, you will look at this and go, oh my goodness, he's lost his mind. But all of his webbing, so his equipment, his pack, straps around his chest, for example, if you can get in there, hit them with a little bit of this pastel green, and then this will probably take, in most cases, 2 thin coats. Now, mixing equipment was not terribly uncommon. You don't want to go overboard with it, but I figured, magazine pouches would be a good spot to show you where the Iraqi sand might look. So I've gone and put that on as well. As you can see, that's quite green. Oh my goodness. But don't worry, have some faith. What we'll do now is paint in his skin. So just a little bit of water in my brush, and we'll thin out. This is Vallejo Beige Red. I love this stuff. This is really good if you want to paint infantry very quickly. You will find in some areas you're going to want to go back and give it a second thin coat. Don't worry too much if you hit the gun, particularly when you're sort of painting in his face here. And remember, you can tip him upside down, and you'll find it easier to approach certain parts of his face. Since we're going to be painting the helmet, it doesn't matter if I get some of that skin color, although it does look a little silly. Now, once his skin is done, you can paint in all of the wood details. I've got flat brown for this. Now, obviously, if he's carrying a Garand or an M1 carbine, he's going to have a little bit more to him. With the Thompsons, funnily enough, there's not too much of this. You'll notice I'm not being terribly careful. A lot of this gun is going to be black later, so I can be quite sloppy at applying this. And if I do make any mistakes while painting in the stock, it doesn't matter because, it's just a quick coat of Russian uniform to fix up the uniform. Don't forget any entrenching tool handles, but just take your time and fill in whatever weapon he's carrying too. Now, while that's drying, you can paint in his helmet with camo olive green, and you'd use the same color whether it's got camo netting over the top or it's just a plain tin hat. I do recommend if you've got any grenades or, bazookas, for example, any kind of painted green stuff would be this color now. Now we're going to use mahogany brown on all of the leather details. You could use leather brown, but that's a lot darker. And because, again, we're going to shade this, we want a slightly lighter color to start with. Mahogany brown. Goodness me, I cannot get words out today. It's got a slightly more red tone to it, which is going to be nice, especially for these jump boots. So don't forget weapon straps, and I'll use a smaller brush for the strap on his helmet. Now we'll very quickly hit the little first aid pouch that we've strapped to his helmet with some German camo beige, but there's no reason you couldn't use Iraqi sand or even one of your webbing colors on this. Then the final step before we get to the fun stuff, because this has of course all been very serious work so far, is a little bit of black and just fill in any of the metal bits on your weapon. So whether it's the Garand, the Thompson, carbine, whatever he's carrying. And as well, Google, as always, is a wealth of resources if you're not sure which bits are actually supposed to be black. Now here's our fella so far. And, he's just flat colors, not looking particularly inspiring at the moment, but everything's in the right place. So what we're going to do now is choose whether we're going to use Strong Tone, which is an Army Painter Quick Shade from the bottle here, or Agrax Earthshade from Citadel. Now, I mention this in every video because, you don't want to have to watch the whole back catalogue just to get one tip. But Agrax Earthshade dries with a slightly warmer tone, whereas Strong Tone will stain all of the miniature and bring all the colours down, as well as acting as a shade. So if you want to go back and, I think, highlight the rest of the miniature again with the base colours, Strong Tone is a very good choice. I use this on a fair few things, but because I want to do this as quickly as possible, I want to try and avoid staining the miniature in quite the same way. So Agrax Earthshade is going to be my choice for that. So give it a good shake. Now let's get to that bit. Alright, now I've given that a good shake, and let's get a nice big brush. You do not have to be terribly careful with this at all. Load your brush up, and we're just going to go over the whole miniature fairly liberally with our Agrax Earthshade. Now, I know that some folks like to turn their nose up at Citadel products, but honestly, I don't think you're going to find anything quite matches Agrax Earthshade for what we've got in mind today. So go around your whole miniature and make sure you're bathing everything in this stuff. Then you want to leave it, give it about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes to dry, and we'll see what we've got then. Now what a difference that makes, right? Suddenly he's not so plastic army man and he looks a little bit more the business. In particular, bringing down the colour of that pastel green on his webbing works really well. There's just a couple of things extra you can do to make him a little bit cooler. So I've got down here a little bit more German camo beige, and I'm not going to add any water to it. I'm actually going to use a small brush, a little flat-edged one that I quite like for this, and kind of scrub most of it off. We're going to dry brush that camo beige just lightly over the top of the netting on his helmet, so we can catch that without having to painstakingly paint in all of those little bits and pieces. Then after that, I've got here a little Vallejo gunmetal. Now this is one of their model air colours, but this comes perfectly well off a brush. We're just going to do a little bit of this just on extreme edges of the weapon. These guns, they weren't shiny metal, but I think as a style choice, you want just a little bit of contrast to make them stand out a bit. And that looks pretty cool. Doesn't take much at all. You can do the same thing with the little, what would you call them, clasps and metal bits down here too. But again, be sparing with it. Now, if there is one other detail to do, which I think really helps these miniatures, is to just highlight his skin. Now, I've actually gone for Citadel's Kislev flesh, because I like the tone that this is over the top of what we've painted. Just the backs of knuckles and such like that. If you wanted to stick to Vallejo colours, basic skin tone, I've got lurking in the background there. But I think that's a little bit brighter than I like my skin to look. So just do your cheekbones, nose, and chin. And just like that, that adds a whole bunch to a miniature. You can spend a lot more time, but for the sake of just getting them done, that looks pretty good to me. Now, if you want to push the boat out, you want to highlight his jacket, what I recommend, grab yourself some Russian green again, and just a tiny wee dot, there we go, of Iraqi sand. I'll put that to one side, and then we're going to mix those together. Just a little bit of water in my brush to make sure that they flow properly. See very quickly we get this nice faded green. So let's quickly just dab a little bit more water in there so that it's usable. And then grab yourself a slightly smaller brush and just pick out a few areas where you want the light to catch the edge of that uniform. So along edges of sleeves, the bottom of his jacket, for example, that's a good line there. Now I would probably recommend don't bother highlighting his trousers. I normally don't on my own US infantry. Like I'll do the jackets because they are an area that you're going to see. But when it comes to the actual trousers, they're that far down, it's not really going to matter. So as much or as little of this as you like, it's kind of a style choice here. But I find that's the easiest way to get, let's just say, the right kind of colour for that highlight. And then a step that I would normally not bother with myself, if you do want to highlight that khaki, a bit of deck tan, will go on very bright, but as it dries, it's going to match that pretty well. Be a little more sparing with this than you might with your other highlights, just because it is so sharp. But if you do want to, match that look, spend a little time with this stuff. Then with a simple base popped on him, he is ready to rock and roll, and I am pretty pleased with the result, if I'm honest. Doesn't take much to elevate, that basic work a little bit, but even if I hadn't bothered with the highlights, he'd still be ready to put on the table with a base. So hopefully guys, something there was interesting to you. As always, feel free to drop a comment in the box below. Twitter and Facebook are both linked there too. This was a lot of fun. You can go ahead and pop his decals on him now if you wanted to, go the extra step, but this is how I paint my infantry. This is how I get my guys on the table real quick. So get out there, grab your brushes, and chuck some reinforcements on the table. Thank you very much for your time. You guys enjoy the rest of your day.